The barn door hung crooked on its hinges, and Winona Warren could see golden lamplight seeping through the gaps as the December wind howled across the Montana plains, threatening to blow her right off her feet as she stumbled toward what she hoped would be shelter for just one night. She had been walking for 3 days straight, her feet bloody inside her worn boots, her stomach hollow and aching, and her fingers so numb she could barely feel them anymore as she pushed open the barn door and slipped inside, collapsing immediately into a pile of hay that smelled like horses and safety. The warmth hit her like a physical thing, and Winona burrowed deeper into the hay, her whole body shaking from cold and exhaustion and the bone-deep relief of finally being out of the wind. She had lost everything in the space of 2 weeks. Her job at the boarding house in Helena when the owner died and his son sold the property. Her rented room above the seamstress shop when she could no longer pay. Her last few coins to a man who promised her a position as a cook at a ranch outside of Trinity, only to disappear with her money and leave her stranded on the road with nothing but the clothes on her back and a carpet bag containing one extra dress, a hairbrush, and her mother's recipe book. The recipe book was all she had left of her family now. Her mother had died of fever when Winona was 15. Her father, a freight wagon driver, had been killed in an accident 3 years later. At 22 years old, Winona had been taking care of herself for 4 years, working as a cook wherever she could find employment, and she was good at it. Her mother had taught her well, and she could make a feast out of almost nothing, could bake bread that melted in your mouth, could roast meat until it fell off the bone. But none of that mattered when you had no kitchen, no supplies, and no money. She must have fallen asleep, because the next thing she knew, early morning light was filtering through the barn walls, and a man's voice was saying something in a low, concerned tone. Winona's eyes flew open and she scrambled backward in the hay, her heart hammering, ready to run even though her body screamed in protest. "Easy there," the man said, holding up both hands. "I am not going to hurt you." Winona's vision focused on him slowly. He was tall, probably in his late 20s, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes the color of strong coffee. He wore work clothes, sturdy and well-made but worn from use, and there was a gentleness in his expression that made something in Winona's chest tighten unexpectedly. "I am sorry," Winona said, her voice coming out hoarse and cracked. "I did not mean to trespass. I was just so cold and I thought, just for one night, I could sleep in your barn and then I would be gone before anyone noticed, but I guess I was more tired than I thought, and I will leave right now if you want me to." The man's expression shifted to something that looked like concern mixed with sympathy. "When did you last eat?" The question caught Winona off guard. I had some bread yesterday morning, or maybe it was the day before. I am not entirely sure." The man muttered something under his breath and shook his head. "Come up to the house. I will make you breakfast." "You do not have to do that," Winona said quickly, even as her stomach growled loudly enough that they both heard it. "I will just be on my way." "To where?" the man asked, not unkindly. Winona opened her mouth and then closed it again because she had no answer. She had nowhere to go, no prospects, and about 15 cents in her pocket. "That is what I thought," the man said. "My name is Ethan Turner. This is my ranch. And you look like you are about to fall over. So I would appreciate it if you would come up to the house and let me feed you before you collapse in my barn, and I have to carry you up there anyway." There was something almost humorous in the way he said it, and despite everything, Winona felt the corner of her mouth twitch. "Winona Warren," she said, "and I can walk just fine, thank you." She stood up to prove it and immediately swayed, black spots dancing in her vision. Ethan moved quickly, catching her elbow and steadying her with a firm but gentle grip. "Right," he said. "Walking just fine, I can see that." Winona wanted to argue, but she was too tired and too hungry, and the warmth of his hand on her arm was the first human kindness she had experienced in weeks. So instead, she just nodded and let him guide her out of the barn and across the yard to a sturdy log house with smoke curling from the chimney. The inside of the house was simple but clean, with handmade furniture and a large stone fireplace that radiated heat throughout the main room. Ethan led her to a chair at the kitchen table and then moved to the stove, stoking the fire and pulling out a cast iron pan. "I should tell you that I am a cook," Winona said suddenly. "Or I was. I mean, I still am. I just do not have a position at the moment, but I am very good at it. If you let me stay just for today, I could cook you a proper meal to pay you back for your kindness." Ethan glanced over his shoulder at her. "You need to rest." "I need to be useful," Winona corrected. "I am not a charity case. I work for what I receive." Something in Ethan's expression shifted, a flicker of respect crossing his features. "All right," he said. "But first, you eat what I make and then we will talk about the rest." He was efficient in the kitchen, moving with the practiced ease of a man who had been cooking for himself for a long time. He fried up eggs and bacon, toasted bread over the fire, and poured her a cup of coffee that was strong and hot and exactly what she needed. When he set the plate in front of her, Winona had to force herself not to fall on it like a starving animal. "Thank you," she said, and meant it more than she had meant anything in a long time. Ethan sat down across from her with his own plate. "So what brings you to Trinity in the middle of December with nowhere to go?" Between bites, Winona told him the whole sorry story: the boarding house, the lost job, the swindler who took her money. Ethan listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker as she spoke. "There are some real low people in this world," he said when she finished. "Man who steals from a woman trying to make an honest living ought to be horsewhipped." "Well, he is long gone now," Winona said. "And I am here, which is not where I planned to be, but at least I am alive." "What were you planning to do in Trinity?" The man said there was a ranch looking for a cook. I do not even know if that was true or just part of his scheme. Ethan was quiet for a moment, studying his coffee cup. Then he said, "I could use a cook." Winona looked up sharply. "What?" "I run this ranch by myself mostly. I have a couple of hired hands who come during branding and roundup, but day to day it is just me. I do my own cooking and it is edible, but that is about the best I can say for it. If you are as good as you say you are, I would be willing to offer you a position. Room and board plus wages. There is a spare bedroom you could use." Winona's heart started beating faster. "You do not even know if I can really cook. So prove it. Make dinner tonight. If it is good, you have a job. If it is not, I will give you enough money to get to the next town and we will call it square for using my barn as a hotel." It was more than fair. It was generous, actually, almost suspiciously so. Winona had learned to be wary of men offering things that seemed too good to be true. "Why would you do this?" she asked. "You do not know me. I could be a thief or a liar or worse." Ethan met her eyes steadily. "Could be, but I do not think you are. I think you are someone who got dealt a bad hand and is trying to make the best of it, and I know what that is like." There was something in his voice that suggested a story there, but Winona did not push. Instead, she nodded slowly. "All right. I will make you dinner tonight, but I will need to see what you have for supplies." The smile that crossed Ethan's face was small but genuine, and it transformed his whole appearance, making him look younger and less careworn. "The pantry is through that door. Help yourself to whatever you need." Winona spent the rest of the morning exploring Ethan's kitchen and pantry. He had the basics: flour and salt and sugar, dried beans and rice. some potatoes and onions stored in a cool cellar, bacon and salt pork, and a few tins of vegetables. It was not much to work with, but it was more than she had seen in days, and her mind was already spinning with possibilities. Ethan had gone out to work on the ranch, something about checking fences before the next snow came, and Winona was grateful for the solitude. She needed time to think, to process what had just happened, to decide if this was real or if she was going to wake up back in the barn, cold and hungry and alone. But the warmth of the kitchen was real. The weight of the knife in her hand as she began to prepare vegetables was real. The smell of the stew she started simmering on the stove was real. And for the first time in weeks, Winona felt something that might have been hope. She made beef stew with the salt pork, letting it cook low and slow so the meat would be tender, adding potatoes and onions and carrots she found in the cellar, seasoning it with herbs she discovered in small jars on a shelf. She made biscuits from scratch, light and fluffy and golden brown. She even made a simple apple dessert with some dried apples, cinnamon, and a bit of sugar, baking it until it was bubbling and fragrant. When Ethan came in at sunset, stomping snow off his boots and hanging his coat by the door, he stopped dead and just stared. "What is that smell?" he asked, and there was something almost reverent in his tone. "Dinner," Winona said, trying not to smile at his reaction. "I hope you are hungry." Ethan sat down at the table and Winona served him, her heart in her throat as she waited for his verdict. He took one bite of the stew and closed his eyes. "My mother used to make stew that tasted something like this," he said quietly. "She died when I was 16. I have not had anything that reminded me of her cooking since." Winona felt her throat tighten. "I am sorry about your mother." "It was a long time ago." Ethan took another bite, then another. "This is incredible. The job is yours if you want it." Relief flooded through Winona so strongly she had to sit down. "I want it," she said. "Thank you. I will work hard, I promise. You will not regret this." "I do not think I will," Ethan said, and there was warmth in his eyes that made Winona's cheeks flush. They ate in comfortable silence for a while, and then Ethan said, "Tell me about your cooking. How did you learn?" So Winona told him about her mother, about standing on a stool in their small kitchen learning to knead bread, about the recipe book that held all of her mother's secrets. She told him about the different places she had worked, the boarding house and the hotel kitchen, and the brief stint at a restaurant that had gone out of business. And Ethan listened like every word mattered, like her story was important, and Winona found herself relaxing in a way she had not relaxed in years. After dinner, Ethan showed her to the spare bedroom. It was small but clean, with a real bed and a quilt and a window that looked out over the snow-covered fields. Winona set her carpetbag down and just stood there for a moment, trying to absorb the fact that this was hers, at least for now. "There is a lock on the door," Ethan said from the doorway, and when Winona turned to look at him, his expression was serious. "I want you to feel safe here. You can lock it every night if you want. I will not take offense." The fact that he had thought of that, had anticipated her potential fear, made something in Winona's chest go soft and warm. "Thank you," she said, "for everything." "You are welcome," Ethan said. "Sleep well, Winona Warren. We will figure out the details of your employment in the morning." That first night, Winona did lock the door, not because she was afraid of Ethan specifically, but because she had learned to be cautious. But she slept better than she had in months, warm and fed and safe for the first time since her whole life had fallen apart. In the morning, Winona woke to pale winter sunlight streaming through her window and the sound of Ethan moving around in the kitchen. She dressed quickly in her spare dress, brushed her hair and pinned it up, and went out to find him making coffee. "Good morning," he said, looking almost sheepish. I was trying to let you sleep, but I am not very good at being quiet." "It is fine," Winona said. "I am used to early mornings. What time do you normally eat breakfast?" "Around 6, usually, before I go out to tend the animals." Winona glanced at the clock on the mantel. It was just past 5:30. "Then I should get started. What do you normally have?" They fell into a routine quickly over the next few days. Winona would rise early and make breakfast, hot and hearty to fuel Ethan for his work outside. Eggs and bacon, pancakes, oatmeal with dried fruit, biscuits with gravy. While he worked on the ranch, checking on his small herd of cattle, repairing equipment, chopping wood, Winona would clean the house, take inventory of the pantry, plan meals, and prepare dinner. In the evenings, they would eat together and talk. Winona learned that Ethan had inherited the ranch from his father, who had died 2 years ago. His mother, as he had mentioned, had passed when he was 16. He had a sister who lived in Denver with her husband and 3 children, and he went to visit them once a year, usually in the summer. He was 28 years old, had never been married, and seemed content with his solitary life, though Winona sensed a loneliness in him that matched her own. Ethan learned that Winona had always dreamed of running her own restaurant, that her favorite thing to cook was bread because it reminded her of her mother, and that she could not sing to save her life, but loved to hum while she worked. He learned that she was fiercely independent, deeply kind, and had a sharp sense of humor that caught him off guard and made him laugh in a way he had not laughed in years. By the end of the first week, Winona felt like she had been there much longer. The house had become familiar, comfortable. She knew which floorboards creaked, which pans heated fastest on the stove, where Ethan kept his spare tools. And she was beginning to know Ethan himself, the way he hummed tunelessly while he worked, the way he always hung his hat on the same peg by the door, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. She tried not to think too hard about the fact that she was noticing these things, or about the way her heart did a little skip whenever he came through the door at the end of the day. This was a job, she reminded herself. A good job, better than she had any right to expect, and she was not going to ruin it by developing feelings for her employer. But then came the evening when Ethan cut his hand while repairing a broken harness, and Winona insisted on bandaging it for him, her fingers gentle as she cleaned the wound and wrapped it in clean cloth. Their faces were close together, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes, close enough to feel the warmth of his breath. And when she looked up and found him watching her with an expression that made her stomach flip, she knew she was in trouble. "Thank you," Ethan said, his voice rough. "You are welcome," Winona managed and quickly stepped back, busying herself with putting away the medical supplies. Neither of them mentioned it, but something had shifted between them, a new awareness that hummed in the air like electricity before a storm. The next day, Ethan announced that he needed to go into Trinity to pick up some supplies and asked if Winona wanted to come along. She agreed, partly because she needed to see what the town had to offer in terms of food supplies, and partly because she was curious about the place that was now, at least temporarily, her home. Trinity was small, barely more than a main street with a handful of buildings clustered around it. There was a general store, a blacksmith, a saloon, a church, and a few other establishments. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's business, and Winona could feel the curious stares as she walked beside Ethan to the general store. "That is Ethan Turner," she heard someone whisper. "Who is that with him? Must be his new cook. I heard he hired someone. Mighty pretty for a cook, is she not?" Winona kept her head high and ignored the whispers. She was used to small-town gossip, had dealt with it her whole life. But she noticed the way Ethan's jaw tightened, The protective way he stayed close to her side. Inside the general store, the proprietor, a round-faced man named Mr. Chester, greeted them warmly. "Ethan, good to see you, and you must be Miss Warren. Heard you were staying out at the Turner place." "News travels fast," Winona said. "Small town," Mr. Chester said with a shrug. "What can I get for you folks?" Winona gave him her list while Ethan wandered off to look at tools. She was discussing the quality of the flour with Mr. Chester when a woman's voice cut through the store. Well, Ethan Turner, I heard you had taken in a stray." Winona turned to see a beautiful blonde woman in an expensive dress, her hair perfectly styled, her lips curved in a smile that did not reach her eyes. Behind her stood an older couple who looked distinctly uncomfortable. "Hello, Caroline," Ethan said, his tone carefully neutral. "How are you?" "Oh, I am wonderful," Caroline said, her eyes sliding to Winona. "Are you not going to introduce me to your new employee?" There was something pointed in the way she said employee, something that made Winona bristle. "Caroline Ashford, this is Winona Warren, my cook," Ethan said. "Winona, Caroline and her parents own the biggest ranch in the area." "How nice for them," Winona said pleasantly. "It is a pleasure to meet you." Caroline looked her up and down in a way that was clearly meant to be dismissive. "A cook, how quaint, and you are staying at Ethan's house, just the two of you. I am sure that will give the town something to talk about." "Caroline," Ethan said, and there was a warning in his voice. "What?" Caroline said innocently. "I am simply stating facts. You know how people talk, Ethan." "I would hate for Miss Warren's reputation to be damaged." "My reputation is my own concern," Winona said coolly, "but I appreciate your interest." Caroline's eyes flashed with anger, but before she could respond, her mother stepped forward. "Come along, Caroline. We have shopping to do." To Ethan and Winona she added, "Please excuse my daughter. It was nice to meet you, Miss Warren." When they were gone, Ethan muttered an apology. "I should have warned you about Caroline." "Old friend?" Winona asked, though she suspected she knew the answer. "Something like that." Her father and mine were friends. There was an expectation for a while that Caroline and I might marry, but I was not interested. Let me guess, she was interested. "Very," Ethan said dryly, "and she does not take disappointment well." They finished their shopping and loaded the supplies into the wagon. On the drive back to the ranch, Winona found herself thinking about Caroline's words. It was true that her living situation was unconventional. An unmarried woman living alone with an unmarried man would raise eyebrows anywhere, but especially in a small town like Trinity. But what was she supposed to do? She had nowhere else to go, and Ethan had been nothing but respectful. "You are quiet," Ethan observed. "Just thinking about what Caroline said, about people talking." Ethan's hands tightened on the reins. "Do you want to leave?" "No," Winona said quickly. I do not want to cause problems for you." "You are not causing problems. Caroline is causing problems like she always does. She has been trying to get me to marry her for 5 years, and she cannot accept that I am not going to change my mind." "Why did you not want to marry her?" Winona asked, then immediately felt her face heat. "I am sorry, that is none of my business." "It is all right," Ethan said. "The answer is simple. I did not love her. I did not even like her very much. She is spoiled and cruel, and she cares more about money and status than about people. I would rather be alone for the rest of my life than marry someone like that." There was a vehemence in his words that surprised Winona. "You deserve better than that," she said softly. Ethan glanced at her, and there was something in his eyes that made her breath catch. "So do you," he said. They did not talk much for the rest of the drive, but the silence was comfortable, companionable. When they reached the ranch, Ethan helped Winona unload the supplies and carry them into the house. Their hands brushed as they both reached for the same bag, and Winona felt a jolt of electricity run up her arm. "Sorry," she mumbled, pulling back. "Do not be," Ethan said, and his voice was low and warm. That night, Winona lay in bed and stared at the ceiling, trying to ignore the fluttering in her stomach whenever she thought about Ethan. This was dangerous territory. She was his employee. She depended on him for her livelihood, her shelter, everything. Getting involved with him would be a terrible idea on every possible level, but her heart did not seem to care about logic. The next few weeks passed in a blur of work and winter weather. Snow fell heavily, blanketing the ranch in white and making outdoor work difficult. Ethan spent more time in the barn, tending to the animals and repairing equipment, and Winona spent more time in the kitchen, experimenting with new recipes and trying to keep herself busy. Christmas came, and Winona made a feast to celebrate. Roasted chicken with herbs, mashed potatoes, gravy, biscuits, green beans preserved from the fall, and a dried apple pie that made Ethan close his eyes in bliss when he tasted it. "This is the best Christmas dinner I have had in years," he said. "Thank you, Winona." "You are welcome," Winona said, pleased. "I have something else for you, too." She pulled out a small package wrapped in brown paper and handed it to him. Ethan looked surprised. "You did not have to get me anything." "I wanted to. Open it." Inside was a pair of knitted gloves, warm and sturdy and made from yarn she had found in a trunk in the spare room. Winona had stayed up late for several nights, working by lamplight to finish them in time. "You made these?" Ethan asked, running his fingers over the careful stitches. "I am not as good at knitting as I am at cooking, but they should keep your hands warm." Ethan looked up at her, and there was something in his expression that made Winona's heart race. "This is the kindest thing anyone has done for me in a long time," he said. "Thank you." "You gave me a home when I had nowhere to go," Winona said. "This is the least I could do." Ethan stood up and walked to the mantel, pulling down a small box. "I have something for you, too." Winona opened the box to find a beautiful hairbrush with an ivory handle, carved with delicate flowers. It was the kind of thing she never would have bought for herself, too expensive and too frivolous. "I noticed yours was falling apart," Ethan said. "I hope this is all right." "It is beautiful," Winona whispered, running her fingers over the smooth handle. "Thank you." They stood there in the warm glow of the fireplace, holding their gifts, and Winona realized with a start that this felt like more than just an employer and employee exchanging presents. This felt like something deeper, something that both thrilled and terrified her. The moment was broken by a loud knock on the door. Ethan frowned and went to answer it, and Winona heard a man's voice, rough and urgent. "Sorry to bother you on Christmas, Ethan, but we have got a problem. Some of your cattle broke through the fence down by the creek and they are mixing with ours. We need to sort them out before they freeze or wander too far." It was one of Ethan's neighbors, a man named Jack Peterson, who ran a small spread to the east. Ethan grabbed his coat and hat, then turned to Winona. "I have to go deal with this. I am sorry." "Do not apologize," Winona said. "Go. I will keep dinner warm." But Ethan did not come back that night. The problem with the cattle turned out to be worse than expected, requiring several men to round them up in the dark and the snow. Winona tried not to worry, told herself that Ethan was capable and knew what he was doing, but she could not help pacing by the window, watching for any sign of him. He finally returned just after dawn, his face red from cold and exhaustion. Winona had stayed up all night, keeping the fire going and watching the dark windows. "You should have gone to bed," Ethan said when he saw her. "I wanted to make sure you were all right," Winona said. "Are you hurt?" "Just cold and tired. We got all the cattle sorted, though. No losses." Winona made him sit by the fire while she heated up food and made fresh coffee. When she handed him a plate, Their fingers touched and neither of them pulled away immediately. "You were worried about me," Ethan said, and it was not quite a question. "Of course I was worried about you," Winona said. "It was freezing out there and dark and dangerous. But you barely know me." "I know enough," Winona said, and was surprised by the fierceness in her own voice. "I know you are kind and hardworking and honest. I know you took me in when I had nothing. I know you make me laugh and you listen when I talk and you care about things and people. So yes, I was worried about you." Ethan set down his plate and stood up, closing the distance between them. "Winona," he said, and her name on his lips sounded like a prayer. "I need to tell you something." "What?" Winona whispered. "I think I am falling in love with you." The words hung in the air between them, enormous and terrifying and wonderful. Winona's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst out of her chest. "I know I should not feel this way," Ethan continued. "You work for me and you depend on me, and it is not fair of me to put you in this position. But I cannot keep pretending I do not feel it. Every morning I wake up looking forward to seeing you. Every evening I come home and the best part of my day is sitting across from you at dinner. You have made this house feel like a home again. You have made me feel alive again, and I do not know what to do about it." Winona took a shaky breath. "You could start by kissing me," she said. Ethan's eyes widened. "You feel the same way." "I have been trying not to," Winona admitted. "I told myself it was foolish, that I was just grateful to you for helping me, that it would pass. But it has not passed. If anything, it has just gotten stronger. I think about you all the time. I watch for you at the window. I make your favorite foods just to see you smile. So yes, Ethan Turner, I feel the same way." Ethan reached up and cupped her face in his hands, his palms rough and warm against her skin. "Are you sure?" he asked. "Because if I kiss you, everything changes. I cannot go back to pretending you are just my cook. I cannot be in the same house with you and not want more." "Then do not pretend," Winona said. "I do not want you to." He kissed her then, soft and gentle at first, then deeper as Winona wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him back with all the longing she had been holding inside. It felt like coming home, like finding something she had not even known she was looking for. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Ethan rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he said again. "I know it is fast and probably crazy, but I love you." "I love you too," Winona said, and felt the truth of it settle in her bones. "I did not think I would ever feel this way about anyone." They spent the rest of that day together, talking and laughing and stealing kisses in between. Ethan told her about his dreams for the ranch, about wanting to expand the herd and build a new barn, about maybe getting some horses to breed and sell. Winona told him about her dream of running a restaurant, about the recipes she wanted to try, about the little things that made her happy. "You could have a restaurant," Ethan said. "We could build one in town. I would help you." "That is a lovely dream," Winona said, "but it is expensive and risky, and I am happy where I am right now." "Where you are right now is in my arms," Ethan pointed out, and Winona laughed. "Exactly." But their happiness was short-lived. 3 days later, Caroline Ashford showed up at the ranch unannounced, driving a fancy buggy and wearing a fur-trimmed coat that probably cost more than Winona made in a year. "Ethan," she called out sweetly as she climbed down from the buggy. "I need to speak with you." Ethan, who had been helping Winona carry in firewood, set down his armload and walked over to her. "What can I do for you, Caroline?" "It is what I can do for you," Caroline said. "I heard the most distressing rumor in town. People are saying that you and your cook are, well, romantically involved. I wanted to come out here and tell you that my family is prepared to help you deal with this unfortunate situation." "What situation?" Ethan asked, his voice dangerously calm. "Well, "Obviously, this woman has taken advantage of your kind nature," Caroline said, not even bothering to look at Winona. "She is probably hoping you will marry her so she does not have to work anymore. But do not worry, we can send her away quietly. My father knows people in other towns who might give her work. You just need to pay her off and she will be gone." Winona felt like she had been slapped. Before she could say anything, Ethan stepped forward, his face dark with anger. "Let me make something very clear, Caroline," he said, his voice hard. "Winona is not taking advantage of me. I am in love with her, and if she will have me, I plan to marry her. Not because she is trying to trick me, but because she is the best thing that has ever happened to me. So you can take your offer and your family's help and leave my property. And if I hear you spreading rumors about Winona in town, there will be consequences." Caroline's face went white, then red. "You cannot be serious. You would choose a homeless nobody over me." "Over my family's wealth and connections," in a heartbeat, Ethan said. "Goodbye, Caroline." Caroline stared at him for a long moment, then turned to Winona with pure venom in her eyes. "You will regret this," she hissed. "Both of you." She climbed back into her buggy and drove away, the wheels kicking up snow and dirt. Ethan watched her go, then turned to Winona. "I am sorry you had to hear that," he said. Winona was still processing what he had said. "Did you mean it? About marrying me?" Ethan took her hands. "I know we have only known each other for a few weeks. I know it is fast. But yes, I meant it. I want to marry you, Winona Warren. I want to wake up next to you every morning and come home to you every evening. I want to build a life with you, but only if that is what you want too." Winona felt tears prick her eyes. "It is what I want," she said. "More than anything." Ethan pulled her into his arms and kissed her, and Winona felt like her heart might explode from sheer joy. But Caroline's threat was not empty. Over the next few days, ugly rumors began to circulate in Trinity. That Winona had seduced Ethan to trap him into marriage. That she was a con artist who had planned the whole thing. That she had probably never been homeless at all, but had faked it to gain his sympathy. Winona tried to ignore the whispers when she went into town, but it was hard. She had always prided herself on her reputation, on being known as an honest, hard-working woman. Having people question her integrity hurt more than she wanted to admit. Ethan was furious when he heard what was being said. He wanted to confront Caroline directly, but Winona talked him out of it. "It will only make things worse," she said. "The best thing we can do is prove them wrong by living our lives with dignity and honesty. Eventually, people will see the truth." "You should not have to put up with this," Ethan said. "It is not fair. Life is not fair," Winona said. "But I have you, and that is all that matters." They decided to get married sooner rather than later, partly to silence the gossip and partly because neither of them saw any reason to wait. The wedding was simple, held at the small church in Trinity with just a few witnesses. Ethan wore his best suit, and Winona wore a dress she had made herself from fabric Ethan had bought for her, pale blue with delicate embroidery at the collar. The preacher, an elderly man named Reverend Thompson, had known Ethan since he was a boy and seemed genuinely happy for them. "I can see the love between you two," he said as they stood before him. "That is a gift, and not everyone is blessed to find it. Cherish it." When Ethan slipped the simple gold band onto Winona's finger and promised to love her for the rest of his life, Winona felt like she might float away from sheer happiness. And when the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife and Ethan kissed her, Winona knew that she had found her home, not in the ranch or the house, but in the heart of this good, kind man who had seen her at her worst and loved her anyway. The gossip died down eventually, especially as people in Trinity got to know Winona better. She started bringing baked goods to church socials, and her pies and cakes were so good that even the women who had whispered about her had to admit she had talent. She helped organize a charity dinner for families in need, cooking a feast that fed half the town. And slowly, grudgingly, people began to accept her as Ethan's wife and as a member of the community. Caroline left town a few months after the wedding, going to visit relatives in San Francisco and staying there. Rumor had it she had found a wealthy banker to marry, someone who cared more about her looks and her family's money than about her personality. Winona wished her well and tried not to feel too satisfied that Caroline was finally out of their lives. Spring came, and with it came new life on the ranch. The cattle had calves, the garden Winona planted began to sprout, and the whole world seemed to be blooming. Winona and Ethan settled into married life with an ease that felt natural and right. They worked together, laughed together, planned for the future together. One evening in May, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Winona told Ethan that she was pregnant. He stared at her for a moment, his eyes wide, and then he let out a whoop of joy and picked her up, spinning her around until she laughed and begged him to put her down. "We are going to have a baby," he said, his voice full of wonder. "You are going to be a mother. I am going to be a father." "Are you happy?" Winona asked, though she could see the answer on his face. "I am more than happy," Ethan said. "I am grateful and blessed and so deeply in love with you I can hardly stand it. The pregnancy was not easy." Winona was sick for the first few months, barely able to keep food down, and Ethan fretted over her like a mother hen. But she got through it with his support, and by summer she was feeling better, her belly growing round and full. They spent long evenings talking about names, about what kind of parents they wanted to be, about the future. Ethan built a cradle with his own hands, sanding it until it was smooth as silk. Winona sewed tiny clothes and blankets, her hands moving over the soft fabric with love and care. In early November, on a cold, clear night with stars scattered across the sky like diamonds, Winona went into labor. Ethan rode into town to fetch the midwife, a capable woman named Mrs. Henderson, who had delivered half the babies in Trinity. She arrived calm and efficient, setting up in the bedroom and sending Ethan out to boil water and pace in the kitchen. The labor was long and hard, and there were moments when Winona thought she could not do it, could not endure another minute of the pain. But Mrs. Henderson was encouraging, and through the door she could hear Ethan's voice, telling her she was strong, that she could do this, that he loved her. And finally, as dawn was breaking over the Montana plains, their son was born. He came into the world squalling and red-faced and absolutely perfect. Mrs. Henderson cleaned him up and wrapped him in a blanket and placed him in Winona's arms, and Winona looked down at his tiny face and fell in love all over again. Ethan came in moments later, his face anxious and hopeful. "Is he all right? Are you all right?" "We are both fine," Winona said, her voice hoarse from hours of labor. "Come meet your son." Ethan approached slowly, almost reverently, and looked down at the baby in Winona's arms. His expression transformed into something Winona had never seen before, a combination of awe and love and fierce protectiveness. "He is beautiful," Ethan whispered. "He looks like you." "He has your nose," Winona said, tracing the baby's features with a gentle finger. They named him James, after Ethan's father, with the middle name of William, after Winona's father. Little James Turner was a quiet baby, watchful and calm, and he fit into their lives like he had always been meant to be there. Ethan was a devoted father, getting up in the night to help with feedings, singing off key lullabies that made Winona smile, carrying James around the ranch, and showing him everything as if the infant could understand. And Winona loved watching them together, loved seeing the gentleness in Ethan's big, rough hands as he held their son. The first year of James's life passed in a blur of sleepless nights and first smiles and tiny milestones. He grew from a tiny infant into a chubby baby with his father's brown eyes and his mother's dark hair. He learned to roll over, to sit up, to pull himself standing on the furniture. And through it all, Winona and Ethan navigated parenthood together, making mistakes and learning as they went, but always supporting each other. When James was 14 months old, Winona discovered she was pregnant again. This time she recognized the signs earlier, the fatigue and nausea and the way certain smells made her stomach turn. Ethan was thrilled, though he worried about Winona handling a pregnancy while chasing after an active toddler. "I will be fine," Winona assured him. "Women have been doing this for thousands of years." "Not my woman," Ethan said. "Not without me taking care of her." So he hired a young woman from town, a sweet girl named Mary who needed work, to come help with James and the housework a few days a week. Winona was reluctant at first, used to doing everything herself, but she had to admit it was nice to have the help, especially as her pregnancy progressed and she grew more tired. This pregnancy was easier than the first. Winona was less sick, more confident, and she knew what to expect. She spent her days playing with James, teaching him his letters and numbers, baking bread while he played at her feet, watching him grow and change. Their daughter was born in late spring, on a warm day when the air smelled like flowers and new grass. The labor was faster this time, and by the time Mrs. Henderson arrived, the baby was almost ready to make her appearance. She was born just after noon, tiny and delicate with a cap of dark hair and lungs that announced her arrival to the whole ranch. They named her Grace, because that is what she was, a grace note in their lives, a blessing they had not expected but treasured all the more for it. James was fascinated by his baby sister, always wanting to touch her soft hair and hold her chubby hands. Winona had worried he might be jealous, but instead he was protective, bringing her his favorite toys and patting her head gently when she cried. Life was full and chaotic and wonderful. The ranch prospered under Ethan's care. He expanded the herd, built a new barn, started breeding horses like he had dreamed about. Winona's cooking became famous in the area, and people started coming to the ranch to buy her bread and pies. She began to think seriously about Ethan's suggestion of opening a restaurant, though with 2 small children it would have to wait. When Grace was 2 and James was 3, Winona and Ethan celebrated their 5th wedding anniversary. It was hard to believe that 5 years had passed since that cold December day when she had stumbled into his barn, desperate and alone. So much had changed since then. She had changed, from a homeless woman with nothing to a wife and mother with a family she adored and a home that filled her with joy. "What are you thinking about?" Ethan asked. They were sitting on the porch again, watching the children play in the yard. Grace was toddling after her brother, laughing as he led her in circles. "I was thinking about how lucky I am," Winona said. 5 years ago I had nothing, and now I have everything." Ethan took her hand and brought it to his lips. "I am the lucky one. You came into my life and changed everything. This house was just a building before you. Now it is a home. I was just existing before you. Now I am living." "We saved each other," Winona said softly. "You gave me shelter when I needed it, and I gave you a reason to fill your house with love again." "Best decision I ever made, letting you stay in my barn," Ethan said with a smile. "Best decision I ever made, stumbling into your barn," Winona countered. They sat in comfortable silence, watching their children, feeling the warmth of the sun and the contentment of a life well lived. Over the next few years, the Turner family continued to grow and thrive. Ethan's ranch became one of the most successful in the area. not because he was ruthless or greedy, but because he was honest and hardworking and treated his animals and employees with respect. People trusted him, wanted to do business with him, and his reputation as a fair and decent man spread throughout the territory. Winona finally opened her restaurant when Grace started school. It was a small place on the main street of Trinity, just 6 tables and a kitchen barely bigger than the one at the ranch, but it was hers and she loved it. She called it Warren's, using her maiden name because it felt right to honor her parents and the recipes her mother had taught her. The restaurant was an immediate success. People came from all over for Winona's cooking, for her perfect biscuits and her tender roasts, and her pies that tasted like heaven. She hired 2 women from town to help her, and together they created a place that was warm and welcoming, where the food was excellent and the prices were fair. Ethan was proud of her, bragging to anyone who would listen about his wife's restaurant, bringing the children in for dinner sometimes, and watching with a smile as Winona moved through the dining room, greeting customers and making sure everyone was happy. James grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved books and animals in equal measure. He would spend hours in the barn with his father, learning how to care for the horses and cattle, or in the house with his mother, reading or helping her test new recipes. He was gentle like his father, kind like his mother, and already at 8 years old, he had a sense of responsibility and honor that made both his parents proud. Grace was her brother's opposite in many ways, wild and adventurous and fearless. She climbed trees and rode horses, and was always coming home with scraped knees and dirt on her face. But she had a huge heart and a fierce loyalty to the people she loved, and she could bake a pie almost as good as her mother's by the time she was 7. When Winona was 30 years old and Ethan was 36, they welcomed their 3rd and final child, another son they named Thomas. He was a surprise, coming along when they thought their family was complete, but he was a welcome surprise, a happy baby who smiled at everyone and seemed content just to be held and loved. The years passed in the way they do when life is good, quickly but richly, full of moments both big and small. First days of school and lost teeth, Christmas mornings and summer picnics, birthdays and anniversaries, quiet evenings on the porch and busy days at the ranch and restaurant. Winona never forgot where she had come from, the desperation and fear of those days when she had nothing. She made a point of helping others when she could, hiring people who needed work, feeding those who were hungry, offering shelter to travelers caught in storms. The barn where she had first slept that cold December night became a place where people knew they could find help if they needed it, and Ethan never once turned anyone away. "You are too soft-hearted," he would tell Winona, but he was smiling when he said it, and he was right there beside her, offering food and money and assistance to whoever needed it. "I remember what it was like," Winona would say. "I remember being cold and hungry and scared. If we can help people, we should." And so they did, and their reputation for kindness spread along with their reputation for fairness and hard work. The Turner Ranch and Warren's Restaurant became institutions in Trinity, places that represented the best of what the community could be. When James was 16, he announced that he wanted to go to college, to study agriculture and learn new ways of ranching. Ethan and Winona were surprised but supportive, even though it meant he would be leaving home for months at a time. They scraped together the money for tuition, and in the fall, they put him on a train to Denver where he would attend the State Agricultural College. It was hard watching him go, their serious, kind boy becoming a young man, but Winona and Ethan were proud of him and excited for his future. Grace, at 14, was already talking about becoming a veterinarian. though that was an unusual career for a woman. But Ethan encouraged her, telling her she could do anything she set her mind to, and Winona backed him up, sharing stories of the women she had met over the years who had defied expectations and made their own paths. Thomas, at 8, was still young enough to just be a boy, to spend his days playing and learning and growing without worrying too much about the future. Winona and Ethan, now in their late 30s and early 40s, settled into middle age with grace. Their love had not diminished over the years. If anything, it had deepened, becoming something richer and more complex than the initial passion they had felt. They knew each other completely now, all the good and the bad, and they chose each other every single day. They still sat on the porch in the evenings when they could, still talked about their dreams and hopes, still stole kisses when the children were not looking. Their hair was starting to gray, their bodies showing the wear of hard work and years. But when Ethan looked at Winona, he still saw the beautiful woman who had stumbled into his barn all those years ago. And when Winona looked at Ethan, she still saw the kind cowboy who had saved her life and stolen her heart. One evening, as they watched the sun set over the ranch they had built together, Ethan said, "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you had not come to my barn that night?" "Sometimes," Winona admitted. "I might have frozen to death, or found work somewhere else, or ended up in a situation much worse than being homeless." "I think about it too," Ethan said. "About how close I came to never meeting you if I had been in town that day instead of working in the barn. If you had gone to a different ranch, if any number of things had been different. But they were not different," Winona said. "I came to your barn and you found me and you gave me a chance, and here we are." "Here we are," Ethan echoed, pulling her close. "With 3 amazing children and a life I never dreamed I would have. You made me believe in love, Winona. Real love, the kind that lasts and grows and makes everything better. You made me believe I deserved to be loved," Winona said. "You saw me at my lowest point and you did not turn me away. You gave me dignity and work and a home, and then you gave me your heart. I will never stop being grateful for that." "I am the grateful one," Ethan said. "Every single day I am grateful." They sat together as the stars came out, comfortable in the silence, content in each other's presence. The ranch around them was quiet, the children asleep inside, the animals settled for the night. It was peaceful and perfect, and Winona thought about how strange and wonderful life could be, how a moment of desperation could lead to a lifetime of joy. The years continued to roll forward. James graduated from college and came home to help run the ranch, bringing with him new ideas and techniques that improved their operation. He married a sweet woman named Elizabeth from Denver, and they moved into a house Ethan helped them build on the edge of the Turner property. Within a few years, they gave Winona and Ethan their first grandchildren, twin boys who had their father's serious eyes and their mother's quick smile. Grace did become a veterinarian, defying the odds and the skepticism of many. She set up practice in Trinity, caring for the animals of local ranchers and farmers, and she was brilliant at it. She married later than her brother, at 28, to a fellow veterinarian she met at a conference in Billings. They had one daughter, a bright, curious girl who loved her grandmother's cooking and her grandfather's stories. Thomas took over the restaurant when Winona decided she wanted to slow down. He had inherited his mother's talent in the kitchen and his father's business sense, and under his management, Warren's expanded to include a small bakery next door. He married young, at 21, to his childhood sweetheart, and they had 4 children who kept the family busy and happy. Winona and Ethan became grandparents 7 times over, and they loved every minute of it. Their house was always full of children and noise and laughter, and they would not have had it any other way. As they grew older, they slowed down. Ethan handed over more and more of the ranch management to James, though he still liked to go out and check on the cattle and horses when he could. Winona stopped working at the restaurant every day, instead just coming in a few times a week to help Thomas with special orders or new recipes. They spent more time together, just the two of them, taking quiet walks around the property, sitting on the porch, reminiscing about the years they had shared. Ethan's hair went fully gray, and his hands became gnarled with arthritis, but he could still make Winona laugh with a well-timed joke. Winona's face gained lines and her back sometimes ached, but her eyes still sparkled when she looked at her husband on their 30th wedding anniversary. Their children and grandchildren threw them a big party at the ranch. It seemed like half of Trinity showed up, along with people from neighboring towns who had known them over the years. There was food and music and dancing, and at one point, Ethan pulled Winona onto the makeshift dance floor and held her close as they swayed to a waltz. 30 years, Winona said, resting her head on his shoulder. Can you believe it? Best 30 years of my life, Ethan said. I would do it all again in a heartbeat. Even the hard parts, Winona asked. Especially the hard parts, Ethan said, because they led us here. Winona smiled and closed her eyes, letting the music wash over her, feeling the solid warmth of her husband's body against hers, surrounded by the love of their family and friends. She thought about that frightened young woman who had stumbled into a barn 30 years ago, how lost and hopeless she had felt. She wished she could go back and tell that woman that everything would be all right, that she would find love and family and a place to belong. But that woman was gone, transformed by the years into someone stronger, happier, more complete. And the man who held her now was the one who had made that transformation possible, who had seen her worth when she could barely see it herself, who had loved her through everything, and made her life richer than she had ever imagined it could be. As the party wound down and the guests began to leave, Winona and Ethan stood on their porch, waving goodbye, their arms around each other. The ranch spread out before them, the land they had worked and loved for 3 decades, the home they had built together. I love you, Ethan Turner, Winona said. I love you too, Winona Turner, Ethan replied. Always have, always will. And as the sun set over the Montana plains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, they went inside their home, together as they had been for 30 years, and would be for whatever years they had left. 2 people who had found each other against all odds and built a life that was more beautiful than either of them had dreamed possible. The seasons changed, the years passed, and life continued in its rhythmic way on the Turner Ranch. Ethan and Winona grew older gracefully, their love a constant in a changing world. They watched their grandchildren grow up, saw some of them marry and have children of their own, making them great-grandparents. When Ethan was 72 and Winona was 66, Ethan's health began to fail. His heart, the doctor said, weakened by years of hard work and age. He spent more time resting, less time on the ranch, and though he tried to stay cheerful for Winona's sake, she could see the frustration in his eyes at his body's betrayal. I am not ready to go yet, he told her one night as they lay in bed. We have more years together. I want more years. Then we will have them, Winona said fiercely, holding his hand. You are too stubborn to give up now, and for a while it seemed like stubbornness was enough. Ethan rallied, seemed stronger, and they had one more spring together, one more summer watching the garden grow and the grandchildren play. But in the fall, he caught a cold that turned into pneumonia, and his weakened heart could not fight it off. He died on a cool October morning with Winona holding his hand, and all their children gathered around his bed, telling him how much they loved him, how grateful they were, how he had been the best father and grandfather anyone could ask for. Winona felt like part of her had died with him. 43 years they had been together, more than half her life, and the thought of going on without him seemed impossible. But their children rallied around her, and so did the community. The funeral was huge, with people coming from all over Montana to pay their respects to a man who had been kind and fair and good. In the days and weeks after Ethan's death, Winona moved through her grief slowly, letting herself feel it fully. She cried when she needed to, talked about Ethan when she wanted to, and slowly, gradually began to find her way forward. She knew Ethan would not have wanted her to stop living just because he was gone. He would have wanted her to keep going, to keep finding joy, to keep being there for their family. So that is what she did. She stayed on the ranch, in the house they had shared for so many years. James and his family checked on her daily, and her other children visited as often as they could. The grandchildren came to hear her stories about their grandfather, about the early days of the ranch, about the love story that had started in a barn on a cold December night. Winona lived for 12 more years after Ethan's death, years that were quieter but still full of love and family. She got to see all 7 of her grandchildren grow up and marry. She got to meet 15 great-grandchildren, each one precious and unique. She kept cooking, though not as much, and she kept telling stories, passing down the family history to the next generations. On her 78th birthday, surrounded by her enormous family in the ranch house that had been her home for more than 50 years, Winona looked around at the faces of the people she loved and felt nothing but gratitude. Her life had been hard at times, had been painful and challenging, but it had also been beautiful and full and rich with love. That night, after everyone had gone home, Winona sat on the porch in her rocking chair, the same porch where she and Ethan had sat so many times over the years. She looked up at the stars and felt his presence beside her, as real as if he were sitting in the chair next to hers. "We did good, did we not?" she said to the night air, to Ethan's memory. "Look at what we built. Look at this family, this legacy. We started with nothing but each other, and look what we created." She felt a sense of peace settle over her, a deep contentment that came from a life well lived. She had been loved and had loved in return. She had raised good children who had raised good children of their own. She had worked hard, had contributed to her community, had helped people when she could. And it had all started because a desperate young woman had stumbled into a barn, and a kind cowboy had chosen to help her. Winona lived for 3 more years, passing away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 81. She was buried next to Ethan on a hill overlooking the ranch, under a big sky that stretched forever. Their headstone was simple, bearing their names and dates and a single line that James had chosen: "Together always." The ranch stayed in the family, passed down through generations of Turners. Warren's restaurant became a Trinity institution, run by Thomas and then his children and then his grandchildren. And the story of Ethan and Winona, the cowboy and the cook who had found love in the most unlikely of circumstances, became a family legend, told and retold to each new generation. Their great-great-grandchildren still live on the land they claimed, still cook from the recipes Winona wrote down, still run the ranch according to the principles of fairness and hard work that Ethan established. And sometimes, on cold December nights, the current residents of the old Turner Ranch swear they can feel a warmth in the barn that has nothing to do with the animals or the hay, a presence that feels like shelter and safety and home. Because some love stories do not end when the people who lived them die. Some love stories echo through time, becoming part of the land and the family and the legacy left behind. And the story of Winona Warren and Ethan Turner is one of those stories, a testament to the power of kindness, the strength of love, and the beautiful things that can grow from the smallest acts of compassion. It is a story that began with a woman who had nothing and a man who had everything to give, and it ended with a family that stretched across generations, all of them carrying forward the legacy of two people who had loved each other against all odds and built a life that mattered. And that, in the end, is the greatest happily ever after anyone could ask for.